Are you a current or future physician assistant wanting to learn more about finances? Then join me on this journey to become a PA the FI way. Hi, my name is Kat, and I'm a practicing certified physician assistant who will be your host. It took me 5 years after I started practicing medicine as a PA to thoroughly dive into my personal finances after I discovered the concept of financial independence. I want to use what I have learned to help you avoid some of the financial mistakes that I have made while sharing some of the financial wins that I have had along the way. Join me as we discuss financial strategies to guide you to becoming a physician assistant on the way to financial independence. Welcome back, everyone, to the PA the FI Way podcast. I'm your host, Kat, and today we have two very special PA guests joining us for today's show. We have Mercedes and we have Jessica, and they are both psychiatric PAs, and I'm so excited to have them. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you for having. I'm glad we're doing this podcast swap. And so I want to say I am just privileged to be on this podcast. You are well known in the podcast world, so thank you for having us.
Of course, I'm so excited. And like you mentioned, we're doing a podcast swap because you ladies launched your podcast, which we will talk about in just a few minutes here. But before we do that, could you introduce yourselves, tell us a little bit more about your PA careers so far, and then what drew you both into the field of psychiatry? And Mercedes, you could go first.
So I been practicing for 17 years. I have to do that calculation. I started working in family medicine and primary care, seeing patients from geriatrics down to pediatrics. And I really enjoyed that. And halfway through my career, I got pulled into psychiatry because of the increased access need. And I also tended to really be good at figuring out something going on, beyond physical symptoms. And there's a collision of those, physical and mental health symptoms. And I was a psychology minor major in the past, so I was always thinking the psychology part of it all. So I got into psychiatry. I've been doing it through actually telepsychiatry with an organization called Orion Behavioral Health. We're stationed in Alaska, and we serve patients in Alaska, Florida, California, and now Texas. So I'm in charge of expanding our practice here in Texas, and I'm really excited about that.
That's so awesome. I love that. And Jessica?
Yeah, so I kind of came to PA school through a bit of psychiatry as well, through kind of a circuitous path. After I graduated from college, I did a year of AmeriCorps, and I did a lot of service work that led me into wanting to pursue a degree as a social worker. So I got a degree in that capacity and worked in psychiatry in mental health capacities as a social worker for many years. I did kind of a women's partial hospital program, a women's trauma program as a primary therapist. And then I moved on to doing a lot of forensic sexual assault exam accompaniment for rape survivors in Los Angeles, along with psychodynamic therapy kind of following afterward. And then from there, having worked with so much sexual violence, I really felt like I needed to make a pivot. And I started to work in medical social work. From there, I was in the emergency department, ICU, maternity. And that's when I really started to have an interest in medicine. And I started to feel like if I was a nurse, if I had been an RN, I would have gone on to be a nurse practitioner. But, for social workers, it doesn't have that same path. And then I discovered the PA profession. I'm like, that is, the answer. That is how people who have all these different health backgrounds can go on and pursue a career in medicine if that's something that interests them. So I was working as a psychiatric crisis emergency department, kind of per diem, had kids, and that's when I started to chip away at prerequisites to go to PA school. And I thought when I went to PA school that I was kind of done with psychiatry. It's spend so much time in mental health. I'm like, surgery sounds awesome. I love give me something is different. I'm far away from that as it can get. And then as I went through PA school, through my rotations, I did an elective in orthopedics. And I kind of felt like everywhere I look, I'm seeing mental health. And I remember in my ortho elective, I said that to the orthopedic surgeon. He's like, well, if you look for it, you'll find it. And I was like, I just can't not look for it. And as soon as I graduated, relocated to Massachusetts, a company reached out to me, actually, recruited me, which made life pretty easy to do consultation in nursing homes, so psychiatric consultations. It was a really nice way to start. And from there, kind of worked in geriatric psychiatry for a number of years, and then eventually adult outpatient, where I am now, and in addition to PA education.
Wow, that's amazing. Both of you have already had such long careers as well as what sounds like fulfilling careers too. And I love that, again, those experiences and skills that you've developed throughout past careers and past lives or past specialties have only helped and enhanced your current roles. Could you elaborate a little bit more about what you enjoy most about psychiatry, and then a little bit more about the types of patients or practice settings that you usually work in?
What I think I love about psychiatry is that there's the same thing in primary care. You're kind of following them through their life chapters. And what I think I'm drawn to is I I actually learn from my patients because every patient has their own story. And as you might know, Kat, I'm an avid reader. I love learning. And with psychiatry, once you have that trusted patient and provider relationship, you become part of their story and you help them wherever they're at. And I think for me, it just matches with kind of I guess my mantra of be a helper. And so that's kind of like my passion in psychiatry is I'm a guide, I'm a helper, but you're the one in the driver's seat.
Love that perspective.
I just always have so much curiosity about people and hearing their life stories. I never get tired of hearing about, people's backgrounds and like where they got to where they are from this point. And then, just like Mercedes said, like I'm now working with patients that I've been working with for like 6 years, and just seeing those relationships develop and being with them in like the difficult times and some of the celebrations, like it really is just an honor to be a part of that process. It's incredible. I was actually talking to somebody today too about how I kind of get windows into different professions, because you'll have, kind of a couple professions like scattered, here and there, like maybe some chefs or maybe some, like train drivers. And one of the professions I've kind of tuned into lately is, the veterinarian care and the struggles that field faces. And I just, always appreciate kind of having these insights. It never gets old.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely very well-rounded, and you learn how to form connections with all types of people from all walks of life too. And that's definitely an essential skill in this specialty for sure. Let's talk a little bit more about your podcast that you recently launched and started as PAs. I love having fellow PA podcasters on the show and highlighting them. So tell us a little bit more about your podcast and what inspired you to create this podcast, to launch it, and what have you learned throughout podcasting too?
Oh my God, that's such an exciting question to answer, Kat. Well, I think let me go back to Jessica and I meeting. So Jessica and I have been involved with the Association of PAs in Psychiatry, so called APAP. And we got involved, or I got involved later than she did. She's been part of APAP for a while. And when I met her and talked about like what are the visions and passions that we should be doing at APAP, we kept on going like, let's continue building community. Let's continue advocating legislatively, advocating for change so that PAs can be recognized as mental health clinicians across the country. So basically, I like met kind of my soul sister in Jessica. And at the end, we started talking about like ideas. And so Jessica and I are idea individuals. And we both thought it would be great to create some type of online community, and we landed on let's do a podcast. And it's actually been an idea for a while, for more than a year. And so it was only this year that we started putting it together, started interviewing earlier this year, and now have the podcast as a business, an LLC. It's called PA Mindset Matters. You can find us on Spotify, Podbean. We have a YouTube channel, and we're very active on Instagram. And the purpose of the podcast was to create that social connection that sometimes us PAs don't feel. Like we kind of feel like we're alone, working in silo. How do we like work in psychiatry when there's barriers involved in many ways? And that's originally how we kind of came about with creating this podcast. And we also have a website, pamindset.com, and that allows us to add additional resources. And so, for example, this past week, we did CAQ webinars. So we did CAQ psychiatry webinars. So we We marketed and advertised that we're going to do a 1 hour crash course, how to
Mhm.
pass a CAQ webinar. We went over like high yield questions. And so it is one of the things that have just kind of like evolved. Once we started the podcast, we saw opportunities, we saw what
Mhm.
other PAs were wanting that want to break into psychiatry. So it's been just an
Mhm.
evolution just this past year.
Yeah, I'm an avid podcaster. I like absorb all podcasts. I love them so much. And the idea kept coming up to me. And I was like, I know Mercedes is like an idea person as well, but she's an idea person who gets things done. And I was like, she would be like the perfect partner. And it has been. I would say like we're still pretty new. We're still like a baby podcast. I think for me, it's learning the
Yes.
software and the logistics involved has been the learning curve.
Yeah, absolutely. All of that can come in time, and you may change your tech stack over the years too, as I have, and learn how to adjust. But again, you have become PAs. So if you are a PA, you can absolutely learn all these tech things too with time for sure. And watching other YouTube channels probably about what types of tips or tricks for different softwares as well can be helpful. But again, huge congrats to both of you for not only having the idea, but actually implementing it and taking the action to see this idea out and really have that sense of the why behind it, right? That why is what will keep you guys going, right? And it sounds like that why is huge for you about having that sense of community and foster that community for psychiatric PAs. And again, it's just so awesome to have more PA podcasters out there. So huge congrats to you guys too. I'm also curious, let's talk a little bit more about burnout for PAs working in mental health. I'm sure that you have a different type of perspective for both yourself as well as your patients that you help through burnout too. So I'm curious, have you experienced burnout as individuals? And then if so, what helped you to actually heal from burnout? What types of practices do you do now to help try to prevent future burnout from happening again?
I'm going to take this question because we do have a mini series on burnout that's going to be released in our podcast. And I have done a couple of lectures on burnout, and it's such a huge topic. I can go anywhere on
Mm.
this conversation, but let's just talk about my journey. So, yes, I have experienced burnout. And I would say two large part of my professional career. The first one was my first job. It was a perfect job in regards to I was serving the underserved, the community that I wanted to serve in primary care, but it was hard work because we had to see patients every 15 minutes.
Mhm.
And, there was pressure on, how to charge, bill, ensure that our funds come in because we were an FQHC. So there's that pressure. And then I was also a new provider. So the pressure of performing. The good thing about that period is I sought help. So I did go into therapy, and there is a lot of resources out there that I don't think new PAs or PAs know. And I use something called the EAPC, which is an employment assistant program that most W-2 organizations have under their employee benefits. You call this number, you get scheduled for a couple of visits in therapy, and it's all confidential. So that's how I started in my PA career. Is I realized I was getting burnout, not just because of the level of the workload, but the stories too. So a lot of the stories that I was hearing, and this was primary care, were heavy and it was triggering, and it made me seek out help. So therapy is how I healed. But another point in that story is that it was the social connections also that helped me heal. That group, that first job, we had MDs, NPs, PAs, and we were all in this kind of the same boat, and we supported each other. We all were kind of burnt out, but we were like crisping together. So we created like after work social group. So we connected and talked. And so that first job was so important for who I am today and how I've grown as a PA. And I now have like very close friends from that first job. I got burnt out maybe a couple years ago. So flash forward, and that was related to I was doing a lot of leadership roles. I was working full time. Actually, I was working more than full time. I had like 3 or 4 contract jobs. So and then I have a family. And so I reached a level where I think my role at home needed more of me, and I had not created the space in my professional world. And that made things crumble internally. And so I think I reached out to again therapy to get that on board, because having that therapist just talk it out and being able to recognize there's things that I have control over that I can change and set boundaries. So anyone that's listening who feels like they're getting burnt out, and they don't know if they have anxiety or depression, I think at the end you realize something's off, and I would recommend people to reach out for help.
I appreciate you sharing your story. And I love that you and your colleagues decided to support each other and even added that to your plate, right? That could seem like one more thing to do, to meet with each other after work and talk through that, have those social connections. But really, social connections and community can help mitigate burnout and help you realize, hey, you're not alone, and help develop resilience as well. When I was burnt out during the pandemic, there was a physician and a NP colleague, and the three of us, we would go for walks over lunch when we were trying to decompress and vent a little bit about the craziness we were feeling with the pandemic too. And they were really instrumental of feeling like they were all in this together and have each other to support and lean on as well. So it's really great when you have supportive colleagues that you guys can identify that you're suffering together, but how can you empathize and help support each other too. So thank you for sharing. And then Jessica, do you have past burnout that you've experienced that you could share a little bit about?
I think it's kind of evolved differently over time. As I mentioned, my very first clinical social work experience was working for many years with sexual assault survivors. And just like Mercedes just said, like hearing the stories and like taking in all that content and, with kind of like the training at the time, like was very much like focused on making sure like you're not re-traumatizing other people by sharing those stories with your colleagues. Right. And that really put us in a bind because then you're holding on to all of this like difficult content. And, around that time, I really started to develop kind of symptoms of what we called at the time was vicarious trauma. But now I would just say trauma because it's just that like relentless exposure, to very traumatic material. But we also had, despite kind of some of those like kind of boundaries that people held in place, we would find like we kind of would have like a designated person who could hear the trauma out. And that's one thing that's a little different with the social work training is that as you're a new social worker, you have to have supervision, which is weekly for the first 2 years, or at least for like 2 years worth of your practice in order to get your independent social work license. And I think that's really valuable. At that time, at my age in life, I don't know that I would have thought to like seek out therapy, but supervision in that way is a very therapeutic process because you talk about all of like the transference and the countertransference and, what the different patients may be like kind of what buttons are those pushing and where do those buttons come from? And so I feel like just having that was so valuable for me to kind of then move forward into clinical practice. But I think that, for me, when I think about burnout, like I think that was probably the time in my life where I really was like, I'm at the point where despite all the other things I can add into my life to support myself, I really just need to make a situational change. And that's when I, worked, kind of pivoted over to medical social work. As a PA now, there's definitely times that I feel like I've felt some burnout, especially during the pandemic. It's never risen to that level. And I think for me, when I think about being burnt out, I'm like, I'm burnt out of like laundry and making mac and cheese again. It's like a lot of like household duties is where I kind of struggle with my burnout. And my big coping with that is podcasts, which make a little bit of joy for some very mundane things that I spend a lot of time doing. And I'll say on that end as well, I love to laugh. And if I can bring in something that's like a little silly, a little unexpected, I just think laughter is truly like the best medicine, as they say.
Absolutely. Yeah, it can be kind of wearing when you're trying to balance and juggle all those things. But if you can make it a little bit more entertaining, a little bit more fun, maybe even educational, and listen to a podcast or have a YouTube going in the background and making it a little bit more interesting, or even an audiobook that can help.
And a lot
too.
of times, just to say one more thing, is like, I'll be very intentional that I'm not always listening to profession related content. So I really, kind of switch it up.
Yeah, it's great for sure. Yes, it can be very tempting to only listen to CME type of content or feel like you have to only be learning, but there's a lot to be said about other things as well and pure entertainment things too. I'm curious with burnout in particular and organizational challenges that come with burnout. and healthcare challenges, working in medicine in general, right? A lot of factors can contribute to burnout. But I'm curious, how do you feel as though PAs can advocate for systemic change to help with those things, but yet still protect their personal energy and well-being while they're trying to advocate and make changes for themselves as well as their fellow colleagues?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that sometimes the way that I explain it is breaking down what is the most common reason that medical care professionals are burnt out. And so if you look at the research, it's systemic problems, right? EHR, prior auths, not being heard by the leadership. And so I think one of the things that I would say to PAs is you can do all the self care you want, which you should, and that's your self discovery and your journey, but you need to look for change and you've got to be part of the change. You can't wait for the change to happen. So, my recommendation is to continue collaborating with your colleagues of all different levels and hierarchy and kind of learn their communication style and how they work. So, kind of being a little bit of a private investigator in your organization, and then start being a leader or actually start the work to look like you're a leader, right? Because sometimes PAs go into an organization and then they're not hired as a leader. But if you start creating these relationships within the organization at all different leadership levels, what you can do is start having a voice at the table. So you can take on, task force, or you can lead a presentation on something. So there's always these open opportunities, and you have to be seeking it. You can't just wait for it to just pop up. So once you are recognized as a leader or you advocate for yourself to be in a leadership position, do an assessment. Do an assessment on the organization where they are in burnout. So we talk a lot about like whether I'm burnt out as a person, but we need to talk about what is the level of burnout in that organization. So you do that assessment, you can use some tools, or you can just whatever works for you. There's a lot of good evidence tools out there. I think the one that's very common is the MBI. But what I wanted to say is do that assessment. When you do that assessment, then you can determine what in that organization needs to change. The majority of times that I've run into, it's really about leadership being part of the conversation and not just talking. They have to talk and the walk. And so that's the part I think a lot of people have difficulty in navigating. I was like, I'm not a leader, I'm just an entry PA. And I was like, nope, you're part of the change. You just have to get yourself to that seat and be recognized. So I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, that's really great advice where if you can share what the concern is and find people that will listen, right? And really try to share what your vision is to try to make changes. Leaders really are problem solvers. So it's not just griping and complaining about the concerns and the issues, but trying to think about how can you solve that problem? What suggestions do you have? What type of feedback do you have? How can you suggest those changes? Because if you think about many healthcare leaders, unfortunately, a lot of them have not worked a day of their life in medicine, right? They are more administrative. They have leadership skills, right? But they don't really know what it's like to work clinically. And again, when you can share your story in a respectful and kind way and not just vent to them, but figure out how to problem solve and make changes that can help you be heard better and be viewed as a leader going forward too. So thank you
Yeah,
for
I'd
sharing
also
that.
like to kind of just add on to that to say that like, advocating is very empowering and it can really give you like a whole sense of like being recharged and rejuvenated in and of itself. Two examples, I actually got to testify on our state's capital this past week to try to expand mental health practice for PAs. And that's always something that's just so like charges me up. And part of me is like, yeah, like I wish I didn't have to do it because, it's silly that some of these barriers exist, but like it is also very like inspiring to be able to like, speak truth to power and just kind of be in that role and really encourage other PAs to come out and do the same. And also share that like I work in PA education. And the way I actually got that position is that a nurse practitioner friend of mine around the pandemic was, looking into working in the emergency department. As I mentioned, I had worked in the emergency department previously as a psychiatric social worker. And it was a similar role, except for on the provider standpoint to do the psychiatric crisis in the ER. And she's like, oh, you should, go into this with me too. They're looking for per diems. And I'm like, yeah, like, let them know and let me know. And then she came back. She's like, oh, they don't hire PAs. And this is a hospital where like it has an educational institute that has a PA school. So I wrote to the head of the PA school. I said, "Did you know that this hospital that's like associated is like not
Wow.
hiring PAs and what's going on with that?" And she reached out. She's like, "Oh, like you have experience in psychiatry. Like, why don't we have a meeting? I'd love to talk to you more." And then wound up kind of recruiting me to do some like adjunctive instruction, and then position opened and it kind of evolved into that. So you just never know what happens. And, I always tell PAs who want to work in psychiatry, like apply to those jobs, even if they don't list PAs. A lot of times it's just a matter of like educating and advocating for yourself goes a long way.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that it's important to make sure that PAs that are listening that they don't know how
Yeah.
to get the seat at the table is challenge. Challenge what the status quo is. And you don't have to know everything about leadership. You don't have to have like an exact vision or protocol to pitch. What you want to do is encourage that culture of
Mhm.
let's talk it out. Let's figure things out. So that what the Stanford model of professional
Mhm.
fulfillment calls is the culture of wellness. And so the culture of wellness gets developed and created by a lot of people coming together with normative values. And so creating that attitude, the behavior and the self care and personal and professional wellness, all of that, it's not going to take one person. It's going to be a community of change. And so, yes, advocate in
Mhm.
legislation, be involved with your state, local PA group, be involved with if you hear that this sounds not right, don't accept the status quo. And then again, be part of the culture shift for positive wellness.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and pearls of wisdom with those answers too. We've touched a little bit on the term self care throughout this conversation. And working in mental health, all three of us, we are highly advocates for self care, right? However, that term can get thrown around and can seem vague and even too unrealistic to implement, especially for busy working professionals, fellow PAs, fellow healthcare professionals. So I'm curious, what does self-care actually mean to you? And what simple practices do you find are the most effective that you can implement in the
Yeah,
middle of a busy day?
I think that this is definitely one of those terms, and it's kind of along the lines with burnout as well, is that like they kind of go hand in hand. And when there's like systemic problems, like taking a yoga class isn't going to fix that. So for me, like advocacy is part of self care in my mind. But then I also have to like keep up with like my dental visits and not get negligent to my own health. I think that's, a very important part that, to be honest, is like very much like a daily process that I'm like kind of constantly running after. But I have a couple things that like I just try to really like maintain as like kind of sacred moments for myself during the day, which is really like having that protective time from myself. It's like first thing in the morning. And sometimes it's only like 10 minutes in the morning where I can just like get outside and like breathe and like try to do some kind of movement when possible. Sometimes I'm lucky enough to like get in 2 hours before everyone starts waking up. And for me, I just can't start my day hitting the ground running. If I do that, I'm really, doing a disservice to myself. And just like I like how Mercedes had said that earlier, like we have to kind of walk the walk. And I feel very strongly because as I'm working with a lot of, my patients, it's about encouraging them to take care of themselves and them to practice their self-care. And I feel like I have to lean into that if I'm going to actually be able to like speak from a place of knowledge to really encourage them to take that forward.
It's easier said than done sometimes, but it's great
Mhm.
reminders that whenever we're encouraging our patients to do it, we need to figure out what that looks like for us too. And part of self-care includes stress management and also having good
Mhm.
lifestyle medicine type of principles too. Self management of your stress can help with that. So I'm curious, we touched a little bit on self-care, some of those practices, but what are your top recommendations to actually help lessen stress and manage stress that you found to help for either yourself or your patients too?
Oh, man, I think that's a great question. I think that it makes me think about
Mhm.
a like a map, like a whiteboard, is that I think what reduces their
Mhm.
stress might be different from what reduces my stress. And so this made me think of two things. Like when working with patients, sometimes I talk to them about how, let's say, their depression or what's going on. Yes, we're going to talk about getting treatment. I'm so thankful that they're here. We're going to talk about, medications. We're going to talk about therapy. And then I put this slide up and it's a circle of other things that they might not be thinking about. And what is around the circle? It's going to be exercise. It's going to be nutrition and eating. It's going to be sleep. It's going to be social connections. And it's going to be mindfulness. And I think I wrote outdoors or sun. And all of those things is such in our grasp. And we sometimes take them for granted. And I think that like figuring out what their values are and what sparks them, I think it's really cool. And that's why I love learning from my patients, like what they're into. Then I can kind of like, oh, let's think what do you want to do? But for me, I mean, I as a provider, as a person, as a woman, as a mom, it's pretty
Mhm.
much exercise, mindfulness practice. I tell some people, I was like, I'm my best person if I meditate regularly and I exercise and I'm able to like be outdoors. I'm my best person. So that's what reduces my stress. And so I have to prioritize it. So for patients, we kind of like investigate what's their kind of combination.
It's great advice, making sure that you are sharing all those different types of lifestyle factors that can help and figuring out what works best for them as individuals. I love that. Thanks for sharing.
Sometimes I just think it's important that we also like kind of surprise ourselves and just always kind of bring in like new things here and there. I recently just went to my hometown, like car racing, which is really like a dirt track and these cars that look like they're put together from like corrugated aluminum. And it was just so fun to like have like a very different experience. Like, not always, that's never been something that's been in my interest. And I just love doing something so completely new. Great.
I love that. I feel like I'm
Sometimes
learning more
I
about
like
you,
to say too,
Jessica.
like everything in moderation, including moderation.
Sure.
It's good to
There you
like,
go.
I think we can get kind of rigid with self-care. We have to be careful with that too.
Oh my God. Yeah, because I think I named the
Mhm.
things that everyone knows about, right? And it's not like a new, like, I knew that Mercedes, like, this is nothing new. But just finding that spark, I think I go back to that word, is because I think Jessica, trying something new, trying something that was not on our bucket list, but it was really fun and it provided her joy and maybe living like a kid again. And I think sometimes we get in this
Mhm.
rut of like, we got to be perfect or we got to get this done. And like, honestly, we just have to be present and like lean into whatever's being in front of us. And I know there's research that shows that
Mhm.
individuals that like pick up new hobbies as they get older, guess what? They have
Mhm.
less depression. So it all makes sense. It's really using that brain for our benefit, and we
Yeah.
have to tap in
It's
it in
funny too,
several
because
different
like
ways.
now we're like, we got to watch our screen time, be careful of like screen time. But just want to share like one of my favorite things to do is to play like Nintendo, like OG, like Legend of Zelda and like Metroid and like all these like old games from the 80s. Like I have my old 80s console and that's like my guilty pleasure. And I just love it. Not to advise screen time,
Nice.
but
I was like, I can't wait to like
Yeah,
play
no, I have
video
like
games
milk
with you,
crates
like the
full of
old school
Nintendo
ones.
Power magazines from the 1980s. I was like the like OG video game kid with notes.
It's so fun. I think all this is a really great reminder, too, that we aren't
Hmm.
just our professional role,
Exactly.
right? We're not just medical providers. We're not just PAs. And the two of you aren't just moms, right? You are multifactorial humans that have all these interests and hobbies. And a lot of that can help with self care and holistic wellness overall. So it's just really great reminders to not only work your life away, but also figure out how to spend your time intentionally outside of your work role too. And touching a little bit on holistic wellness, that can look like where you are taking care of all aspects of health, physical health, mental health, emotional health, social health, spiritual health, and even financial health. And I'm curious, as psychiatry PAs, how do you define holistic wellness for providers, and how do you feel like they can be intentional about making sure that holistically they're well so that they can provide good care for their patients too?
That's a great question, Kat.
All
Jessica,
you.
do you want me to take it or you want to take
You can
it?
start.
Oh, me. Okay. It's such a great question. So, in summary, you're asking me to tell people what holistic wellness is about and how they kind of can get on this in their life. And I think what I would tell people is do an
Mm.
inventory, do a 360. So, what that means to me is you're going to look at what your life is about. And if it fits the values and principles that you say that you have, definitely make sure that your values are your values. And also check in with your family and those that are closest to you. Are they feeling like you're part of the day to day life? Is that one of your values? So I would do an inventory of what's going on and do that assessment and then figure out how to regroup, get back on track. And that can mean so many different things for every person. So, there's individuals that are already, goes to church every Sunday, but maybe that's not their thing and they want to do something else. So you have to create an inventory of what you want in your life. And so you select if it's putting more effort on the spiritual or the financial. The financial's a really good topic because I don't think a lot of people look at that in their inventory until it's maybe too late. And so I think that it is important to have that conversation early on. I think that financial education actually should start really early, not just when we're in PA school. So I think that looking at, well, if you really do want to retire or you know, buy a second house or do something like that, you got to look deep and do an inventory of your finances. And that might be uncomfortable to many, but I think it's really critical because guess what? It ties into your values and your principles and your vision.
Was kind of just thinking about like my patients and when they're under financial duress, just anyone, friends, family, like myself, like
Mm,
anytime like you're very financially stressed, I think it really triggers like kind of your like fight or flight instincts. And people kind of like lock into survival mode. And I find that it's very hard for me to kind of like do a lot of like therapeutic work or to like get the right med when they're having so much of like an anxiety
yeah.
reaction around the financial piece. And a lot of times like they'll come and they'll just be having like the worst day of their life. And I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so emotionally like dysregulated. Like we got to try something new. And then I'll hear more about the situation. And I'm like, this is not something that a prescription is going to like attend to. And we talk it through. And, it's one of those situations too, where as a provider, you can feel very helpless. Like
Yeah.
somebody's getting like evicted or somebody's like really kind of like on their last means, trying to connect to
Yeah.
resources as best you can. But then I'll see them again, like say a month later and like turned a corner. In the times in which that happens, somebody's turned a corner and they're like, yeah, I'm fine. And you're like, okay. What a difference that makes, right? It's a very profound
Yeah.
effect on mental health.
Yeah, I will say the patients that I have where they have multiple stressors going on, when they have that financial stress on top of it, that just exasperates everything else too, because they feel like they can't spend their money in other areas, but yet they need to, and they feel torn with that. Or sometimes they'll even try to skip
Mhm.
our
Yeah.
visits or therapy visits because they
Mhm.
don't want to pay for the medical visit too. And so it just exasperates and builds on each other too. So it's a really great area of health to focus on for not only ourselves as individuals, but also our patients too. And wrapping up here too, I'm curious with the next 5 to 10 years, I know the two of you are so passionate about PAs and psychiatry, but could you share what you feel as though the vision would be and where you'd like the conversations to go around PAs and psychiatry coming up over the next several years here?
Yeah, I'll take that on. My vision is that every PA sees that mental health is part of their practice. It's part of their skill set, it's part of their skill, box. And I think that all PAs are psychiatry PAs in a sense. And there's a continuum, you can specialize in particular areas in psychiatry. I specifically have a passion in child and adolescent psychiatry. So there's a large area that I think that PAs can look into to increase their education and knowledge. But in 5 to 10 years, what I hope to see is
Hmm.
that there's more psych PAs in leadership. There's more PAs in leadership. And this is not just in our PA organizations, but I'm talking about
Hmm.
in the executive suite. I am talking about in the leadership in the capital. Like, we should never stop growing. We have great mindset. We have a great skill set. I see so much opportunity for PAs to step up. So that would be my like medical world vision is that PAs rule the world, maybe? I don't know. No, PAs would be more respected in the mental health world.
I
It's
was
like a
talking about
wonderful
how, going
vision.
to the Capitol and testifying for PAs to have like more expanded rights. And, what PAs want is just to not have practice barriers, coming to stop them from helping patients. And these are practice barriers that physicians don't have, and in many cases that nurse practitioners don't have. And so what I would like envision 5 to 10 years is that we no longer have to spend our energy trying to eliminate practice barriers. The barriers are gone. And then we and physicians and nurse practitioner colleagues can go and all advocate together to expand mental health care and accessibility, period.
Exactly. And not feel like we're trying to be territorial or fighting against other professions, because that's absolutely not what's best for us or our patients too. It can absolutely be collaborative and collective to be able to help with our nation's mental health also. So I will include all of the information and the links in the show notes, but could you share how our listeners could connect with you, where they can find your podcast, YouTube, those types of things too?
Yeah, so we have a website that will hold all of that information. So it's PAmindset.com, and we have a very active Instagram. It's PA_mindset matters. We also are on LinkedIn, so it's PA Mindset. We're on Spotify and Podbean. But yeah, just give us a message or follow us on Instagram. That's going to be the place where we're going to announce everything like future events and webinars. And then the website's going to hold the events that we're hosting. It'll go over a little bit of our bio. We're actually selling t-shirts for our
Love that.
podcast. And we were hoping that anyone that's going to the upcoming Psych Congress PA Institute in December in Orlando here in this year will buy a t-shirt so I can distribute them there, and we can all be wearing the t-shirt of our podcast, which the tagline on that t-shirt is all PAs are Psych PAs.
That's so awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that information. And I encourage all the listeners to connect and follow Alana as well. And thank you so much for both of your time, Mercedes and Jessica. I appreciate you taking your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you for tuning in, and I hope that you decide to continue to join me along this journey of becoming a PA the FI way. Please take a moment to press the subscribe button on the platform that you are listening to this on, but more importantly, consider sharing with another current or future PA that could benefit from the information that we reviewed in this episode. Take care and have a great rest of your day. Until next time.